She loved a man she shouldn't have. She paid for it with bruises and silence. But when a stranger rode through the fire, she saw something she never thought she'd feel again: hope. Not escape, not rescue, just hope. The blood was fresh, smeared along her cheek like war paint. Ellie Harrow didn't flinch as the door slammed behind her. She just stood there, one hand still gripping the doorframe for balance, her breath shallow and sharp. A log popped in the hearth, but the sound didn't register. Not louder than the ringing in her ears. Not louder than the footsteps that had followed her down the hallway. But they stopped. This time they stopped. And for that she was grateful. She moved slowly across the room, her ankle twisted and useless beneath her skirt, her lips split down the center. The fire cast flickers of light against the floorboards, but they didn't reach the corners of the room, didn't touch the dark where silence clung like mold. She sank to the ground beside the hearth, not to cry, not to think, just to stop. Her fingers found the place where the brooch had torn free from her blouse, leaving a small pinprick of blood beneath her collarbone. It had been her mother's, a gift she wasn't supposed to keep, a memory she wasn't allowed to wear. She would look for it later, if she could move later. The stairs above creaked, the kind of creak that made her freeze even though she knew he wasn't coming down. Not yet, probably passed out, or maybe just waiting. He liked to wait, and the waiting was worse. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, low and slow like a drumbeat. The wind pulled at the shutters, shaking them in their frames, but the latch held. Ellie hated storms. Not because of the noise, because of what came after. Rain meant isolation. Isolation meant no witnesses, no excuses to leave the house. Nothing but her and him. Her fingers dug into the floorboard seams, nails biting wood. Her bruised ribs throbbed with every breath. That was when she heard it, faint at first, nearly lost beneath the moan of the wind and the patter of the first drops on the roof. Hoofbeats. Not the plodding gait of a farmer's mule or the frantic scatter of cattle. No. This was different, steady, purposeful, a single horse riding hard. Ellie rose too fast, nearly falling, gripping the mantel for balance. A rider at this hour was rare. A rider during a storm unheard of. She limped to the window, careful not to let the curtain shift too much. From the gloom of the front yard a figure emerged. Tall in the saddle, shoulders hunched against the rain, coat trailing like a shadow behind him. She couldn't see the face, but the horse was big, black, not local. The kind of beast that didn't just wander into Hollow Bend. He dismounted like a man used to travel. No hesitation, no urgency either. He tied his horse to the post and approached the door as the storm began to gather strength. For a moment, Ellie simply stared. Then she looked at the stairs, then back at the door, her breath caught. A knock. Not loud, not demanding, just 3 slow taps, deliberate as a judge's gavel. She didn't move, didn't answer, then again. Knock, knock, knock. She backed away, lips trembling, torn between fear and something else she hadn't felt in years, curiosity. He knocked a 3rd time and then he spoke. I ain't here for trouble. The voice was low, rough, not slurred, not angry, a calm she hadn't heard in so long it felt foreign. She glanced again at the stairs, still no movement, still safe for now. She opened the door. The man on the other side wasn't what she expected. He looked like sin after a long ride, dusty, soaked, with a long coat that hung heavy on his frame. He wore a hat low over his brow and had stubble along his jaw that looked days old. A rifle was strapped to his back, and a revolver sat at his hip, but he wasn't reaching for either. I'm looking for someone, he said simply. Name's Colt Avery. The name didn't mean anything to her, but the way he said it, the way his eyes scanned her face, pausing just briefly on the bruises, did. Wrong house, she murmured. But she didn't close the door. Colt's eyes narrowed slightly. Maybe you live here alone. She hesitated. No. A beat passed. His gaze flicked to the shadowed stairs behind her, then to her wrist where purple bloomed beneath pale skin. He didn't comment, just gave a small nod. Storm's getting bad, he said. Mind if I stable the horse, just till it breaks? She should have said no. Should have shut the door, walked away, hidden like always, but instead she nodded just once. "Barn's out back," she said. He tipped his hat and disappeared into the rain. Ellie closed the door with shaking hands. She didn't know why she'd let him in, why she hadn't lied, hadn't protected the silence like she always did. But something about the way he looked at her, it didn't feel like pity. It didn't feel like judgment. It felt like he saw her. Colt returned a few minutes later, water dripping from his coat, boots muddy. She let him in without a word, and he took off his hat, brushing rain from his sleeves before stepping inside. "Thank you," he said. She offered him a seat near the fire and fetched a second cup from the cabinet. Her hands trembled as she poured, the cup clinking against the pitcher. She cursed under her breath. He noticed. "Don't worry, I've been served worse." He took the cup gently, fingers brushing hers. She winced. "Ellie," she offered, the name coming out softer than she expected. "Ellie Harrow." Colt nodded. "Nice to meet you, Miss Harrow." She glanced at the stairs, still no sound. Maybe passed out after all, or maybe waiting to catch her in this small moment of disobedience. Her breath caught again. Colt didn't press. He just drank his coffee, eyes scanning the room, every corner, every window. She realized suddenly that he'd sat where he could see the whole house, like a man used to danger, like a man who didn't trust closed doors. The wind howled harder, the rain now a steady beat against the roof. The fire crackled, and Ellie found herself sitting beside him, closer than she meant to. She didn't speak. Neither did he, but somehow the silence didn't feel like a threat. It felt like peace. Until the floor creaked upstairs. Colt's hand went instinctively to his sidearm, the motion smooth and quiet. Ellie flinched. Her heart raced. She stood quickly. "Just the house, it's old." Colt didn't answer. He didn't need to. His jaw was tight, eyes sharp. He didn't believe her, not entirely, but he didn't challenge her either. That night the storm raged and they sat in uneasy quiet, but something in her shifted. She wasn't used to being seen, to being listened to. And though she didn't know Colt Avery, though he had secrets behind those storm-colored eyes, she felt something strange take root in her chest. Not trust, but maybe the first fragile seed of it. She would have told him to leave before dawn if she'd had the strength, if part of her didn't want him to stay. She would have. But when she woke in the middle of the night to find the front door open and his coat gone from the peg, that seed twisted into something colder. Fear. The wind had died, but the fear didn't. Ellie stood barefoot in the doorway, her nightgown clinging damp to her legs, the cold sneaking through the open door like a thief. The yard lay still beneath the early dawn, only faint streaks of light curling through the low clouds, not enough to chase the shadows off the trees or the frost from the grass. Colt's horse was still tied at the post, untouched, but his coat, his hat gone. The barn doors hung ajar. Something in her stomach twisted. Not panic, not yet, but the uncomfortable prickle of something being wrong. Too quiet, too still. She stepped outside, wincing as her bare feet met the frozen ground. The wind tugged gently at her hair, and the silence stretched long enough to start setting her nerves on edge. She made it halfway across the yard before a voice cut through the fog. "Get back inside." Colt stepped out from behind the barn, rifle in hand, jaw tight. His coat was thrown over one shoulder, his hat slung low to keep off the drizzle. His boots were wet, but his hands steady. "Why?" she asked, too tired to hide the question behind fear. Colt didn't answer right away. Instead, he scanned the tree line like a man expecting something to move, something dangerous. "Someone's been watching the house," he said finally, voice low. "Tracks along the ridge, fresh, real fresh." Ellie's breath caught. "Are you sure?" "I don't guess about things like that," he said, and she believed him. He walked past her, slow and deliberate, checking the ground like it spoke to him, and maybe it did. Men like him didn't travel without purpose, didn't trust easily, but now he was here, and something was keeping him here. She followed him back toward the porch, her arms wrapped tight around herself, every nerve stretched taut. "Is it him?" she asked. Colt didn't look at her. "You tell me." She flinched like the question was a blow, because she didn't know, because she did. Because the answer wouldn't matter. Men like Judd never let go easy. Not of property, not of pride. And she'd been both in his eyes. A thing to break and hold and punish when the world felt too big for him. Colt didn't ask more, didn't need to. "Go back inside," he said again. "Keep the fire going, I'll be close." Ellie wanted to ask why he cared. Why he wasn't riding on, storm past, and no debt between them. But the question stuck in her throat. Instead, she did as he said. She went inside. She bolted the door behind her. And then she sat by the window and watched the trees, the horizon, the pale gray morning stretching its spine across the sky. Colt circled the house 3 times before he disappeared behind the ridge again. She didn't see him for hours. The children next door, usually loud by sunrise, stayed silent. The town itself felt like it had retreated underground. Hollow Bend wasn't a bustling place to begin with, but today it was ghosted. She drifted through the cabin like a shadow. Cleaned dishes that were already clean, folded linens that didn't need folding, checked the front door latch twice, then again. Her ankle throbbed, but she ignored it. Her ribs flared each time she breathed too deep, but she welcomed the pain. It was something to feel that wasn't waiting. By midday, Colt returned. Silent as before, tracking mud on the floor and a fresh cut across one knuckle. "You were right," he said simply, dropping a bundle on the table. Inside was a knife. A thin strip of fabric she recognized from Judd's saddlebag, and a coin foreign, heavy, the kind smugglers used in the old passes. Ellie touched the fabric with shaking fingers. "Why?" "He's close," Colt replied, "and he's not alone." The weight of that settled hard between them. Colt started moving differently after that. He unpacked a small case from his saddle, oil, cloth, extra rounds, a second revolver, smaller than the one he wore but just as polished. He didn't say what he was preparing for. He didn't need to. Ellie knew. And still, he didn't leave. That night she cooked again, stew this time, the last of the potatoes and a little salted beef. Colt didn't speak while they ate, but his eyes stayed on the door, on the windows, on her. "Why are you still here?" she asked finally, her voice hoarse. He looked up. "I told you I was looking for someone." "Still?" Colt didn't answer at first. Then, "He's not who I thought he was." A lie maybe, or a truth wrapped in something more. She let it go. After dinner, Colt sat by the fire and began carving again. A piece of pine this time. His fingers moved slow, rhythmic, the blade glinting in the firelight. Ellie watched him, her own hands resting on her lap, fingers curled into her skirt. "You ever kill a man?" she asked before she could stop herself. Colt paused. "Yes." "Did you want to?" "No." She swallowed. "Did you regret it?" Colt looked at her then, really looked. Some of M. The quiet returned, heavier this time, but not dangerous, just honest. Outside, the rain came again, softer now. No thunder, just a steady whisper against the roof. Later that night she woke to a sound. A click, subtle, almost missed. She sat up, heart racing. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows. She crossed the room slowly, careful not to make the floorboards creak. The back door was ajar. She moved to close it when a voice stopped her. "Don't." Colt was already there, crouched low by the edge of the porch, rifle raised. He pointed to the edge of the tree line where the brush had been disturbed. Not by deer, not by weather, by men. "They're watching," he said. She stepped back, away from the door. "How many?" "3, maybe 4. "Judd?" Hard to say, but one of M's got a limp. Her breath hitched. Judd's brother, Roy, crushed his foot years back. Never healed right. Walked with a stagger like his bones didn't remember what straight felt like. "They're waiting for something," Colt said. Maybe night, maybe you. The words chilled her more than the wind ever could. What do we do? We make M wait. Colt stayed up that night, didn't sleep, didn't blink. She watched him from the bed, his silhouette near the fire, a sentinel made of shadows and grit. His rifle leaned close, hand always within reach. He didn't ask her to rest, but something in his stillness gave her permission. For once she didn't dream of fists or darkness, just breath and space and the low rhythm of safety. But safety was fragile, and dawn always brings choices. When she woke, Colt was gone. Again. But this time there was no trail of footprints, no scent of coffee or sound of movement, just an empty chair, an untouched rifle, and a letter on the table, folded once. She stared at it like it might bite. When she finally opened it, her hands shook worse than ever. Ellie. I left before they could see me leave, heading east, drawing them off. If I'm right, they'll follow. I'll come back if I can. If not, don't wait. You're not weak, you're not alone. Lock the door. Cold. Her fingers clutched the paper like it might dissolve. Outside, the wind had changed. She stepped onto the porch and saw it, a single trail heading east, hoofprints deep and sure. But a second trail ran behind the barn, smaller, footprints, 4 sets, and they didn't follow Colt. They circled back. Her breath caught in her throat. They were still here. She didn't scream. Ellie Harrow had learned a long time ago that screaming only drew attention, the kind that bruised and broke and left you hollow. Instead, she backed away from the porch, her feet light on the old planks, her eyes locked on the tracks near the barn. The footprints were deep in the mud, one dragging slightly like a bad foot. 4 men, at least. She counted again, praying she was wrong, but she was. They hadn't gone after Colt. They were still here. Her first instinct was to run, but the cabin offered no escape. Not anymore. She thought of grabbing the rifle, but Colt had taken his, and the smaller one was locked in the cabinet, the key somewhere in his coat. Wherever he was now, riding east, dragging ghosts behind him. The only weapon left was the iron skillet hanging beside the hearth, blackened and heavy. She grabbed it, her fingers white-knuckled around the handle. She moved to the front room. Every window was shut, every curtain drawn, but that didn't mean they weren't already watching, waiting. Judd liked to play with his food, and this would be a game to him, a punishment for disobedience, for shame, for leaving. She braced herself behind the door, skillet in hand, breath shallow. Nothing happened. Minutes passed, maybe hours, maybe just a long, slow death of time. Her hands trembled from the strain, from the silence, from the not knowing. Then soft, the scrape of leather on wood, a shift in shadow. She caught it out the corner of her eye. Movement. A man near the side of the house, crouched beneath the window. Ellie's grip tightened. The doorknob turned. Slow, deliberate. She held her breath, pressed her back against the wall. The door creaked open 2 inches, 3. No voice, just silence. Then a face pushed through the gap, unkempt beard, eyes bloodshot. Roy. The limp was obvious now. His right foot dragged slightly as he stepped inside, holding a long knife that looked too clean for his kind of work. He moved cautiously, like he expected a trap. He wasn't wrong. Ellie swung hard, the skillet connecting with the side of his head. The crack was loud, sickening, and Roy went down like a bag of wheat, face first into the floorboards. Blood bloomed beneath his ear. She didn't wait. She grabbed the knife from his hand, fingers slick on the hilt, and ran to the back door, unlocking it in a blur. She barely got it open when another figure loomed in the doorway, broader than Roy, smiling, one gold tooth. "Hey there, sweetheart." She tried to slam the door shut, but he caught it with one hand, pushing against her weight like it was nothing. The knife was in her hand, but her grip was bad, the blade awkward. He shoved her back and the knife clattered across the floor. She scrambled after it, but he grabbed her ankle, dragging her hard. Her ribs screamed, her vision swam. The man climbed over her, breath reeking of whiskey. "You made a mistake, girl." His hand raised to strike, and then he was gone. 1 second over her, the next. A shot, a blur, and his body jerked backward as something heavy struck him from behind. Ellie gasped. Colt Avery stood in the doorway, revolver raised, smoke curling from the barrel. His coat was soaked again, his eyes darker than she'd ever seen them. Not furious, focused, still. He stepped inside, gun trained on the man writhing on the floor. 3 more, Colt said calmly, eyes never leaving the target. Outside, but I reckon they'll wait longer this time. Ellie stared up at him, heart racing, pain blooming down her side. You came back, she whispered. I told you not to wait. She almost laughed, almost. Colt turned to her, holstered the revolver, and helped her up without a word. She swayed, pain stealing the air from her lungs, but she didn't fall. We don't have long, Colt said. They'll regroup, and they'll come angry. Then what, she asked. We run. No, he said, we finish it. She didn't ask what that meant, she just nodded. Together they dragged the unconscious man into the pantry, tying his hands with curtain cord. Roy was still breathing too, barely. Colt pressed a cloth to the worst of the bleeding, then stripped the 2 of weapons and tossed them into the fire. Ellie watched the blaze consume the knives and pistols like a ritual, smoke and metal and ash. You said they were waiting for something, Ellie said finally. What? Orders, Colt replied. They weren't gonna move on you unless Judd said so. She froze. He's not here. Colt shook his head. He sent them ahead. He's not far, but he's not close either. That trail I left, he's following it. He'll know soon it was false. And then he'll come back. The dread settled in her gut like stone. Judd wasn't just cruel, he was clever, and he'd never lost anything he didn't bleed for. Colt paced now, thinking, watching the windows. Ellie followed him with her eyes, noting the way his hand rested on the revolver again, the tension in his shoulders. I can't keep you safe forever, he said after a long moment, but I can give you a choice. She looked at him. We can ride tonight. Before Judd gets here, I know places to disappear, or we stay, we end this. Ellie didn't speak. Her mouth went dry. Her eyes drifted toward the shadows again, the places where fear liked to live, the bruises on her arms, the ache in her bones. I'm tired of running, she said softly. Colt met her eyes. Then we don't. They worked in silence after that, barricading doors, loading what weapons they had, sharpening tools that hadn't seen use in years. Colt explained things as he moved, where to stand, how to breathe, when to fire. She listened, absorbing every word, not because she thought it would be enough, but because she had to. The sun sank low, burning through the fog like a wound. The land around Hollow Bend turned amber, then bruised purple. The last light fell across the face of the unconscious man in the pantry. Roy stirred, groaned. Colt didn't bother silencing him. They'll know, Ellie whispered. They'll hear. Let 'em, Colt said. And then the night came. Still silent. Ellie sat by the front window, Colt across the room near the back. The fire had been doused. The lamps turned low. Shadows reclaimed the house. Every noise made her heart jump. Every creak could be boots. Every gust of wind, breath. Then hoofbeats. Colt rose, quiet as death, moved to the front, peered through the curtain. One rider, he said. Judd. Maybe. Ellie came to his side. Together they watched the figure ride closer, slow dismount, the coat, the hat, the walk. Judd. He stood just beyond the porch light, arms crossed. Ellie, he called, open the door. She didn't move. I know you're in there, he said. I know what you've done. Still, she said nothing. You hit my brother, you tied him up, you stole from me. Her jaw clenched. Open this door, Ellie, and we'll forget it. We'll start fresh, like none of this ever happened. Her fingers tightened around the revolver Colt had pressed into her hands hours before. No, she said. Outside, Judd paused. You got 5 seconds, girl. She raised the gun, her breath stilled, her world narrowed. And then he moved. Boots on the steps, shadows in the windows, 3 more men circling. Colt shouted. The door shattered inward. Everything turned to fire. The door burst open like a thunderclap, splinters flying, hinges ripped from the frame, cold air crashing in behind the men who followed. Ellie barely had time to stumble back before Colt was there, between her and the chaos, his revolver already raised, already firing. The flash lit up his face, stone-set and calm, the look of a man who'd seen worse and survived it. The first man through the door dropped. He didn't cry out, just fell, his momentum carrying him into the floor like a sack of wet grain. The second hesitated. That was his mistake. Colt's next shot sent him reeling backward, smashing into the porch rail. For a second, only a second, it seemed the momentum might break. But then Judd stepped through the haze of smoke and blood, unshaken, his boots crunching against the shards of what used to be Ellie's front door. He didn't flinch, didn't run, just raised a shotgun with steady hands and pulled the trigger. The blast tore through the cabin wall, knocking Colt back. Ellie screamed without sound, her voice stolen by the shock. Colt hit the floor hard, shoulder first, his gun skidding across the room. Judd stepped inside. Put it down, he barked, voice low, deadly. Ellie. Her arms trembled as she raised Colt's smaller pistol, her hands barely steady enough to keep it pointed. She'd never shot a man before, never even held a gun before Colt. You don't want to do this, Judd warned, stepping closer. But she did. Every bruise, every lie, every time she'd looked in the mirror and not recognized the woman staring back. This moment had been coming long before Colt Avery rode into her life. This moment belonged to her. I said stay back, she said, her voice shaking. Judd's lips curled into a sneer. You gonna shoot me? He asked. You don't have it in you, girl. Behind her, Colt stirred barely. His hand reached for the rifle, inches out of reach. Judd didn't notice. You think he's gonna save you? Judd gestured toward Colt. Some saddle tramp with a bounty and a bad shoulder. You think you're better now? No, Ellie said, fingers tightening on the trigger. I just don't think I deserve worse. The click echoed in the room like judgment. But no shot fired. Empty. She looked down, stunned. Colt's voice came low from the floor. Pocket. Ellie didn't hesitate. She dove for Colt's coat, digging through the inner pocket until her fingers closed around the cold metal of a second revolver, loaded, heavy. She turned. Too slow. Judd lunged. They crashed to the floor, her elbow slamming against the table leg, the gun sliding across the boards. Judd's hand was around her throat, squeezing, eyes wide and wild and full of something far older than fury. Her vision blurred. Stars danced. Then another sound. Not a gunshot, a crack. Judd's body jerked. He let out a gurgled scream and rolled away. Colt stood now, barely, blood dripping from his temple, the broken remains of a chair leg in one hand. He looked ready to fall again, but he didn't. He just stood there, swaying, glaring down at Judd, who clutched his leg, blood seeping between his fingers. You don't hit women, Colt said, his voice low and cold. Not ever. Judd snarled and reached for the shotgun. Colt kicked it away. Ellie crawled to the revolver, hands slick, vision swimming. Her fingers found the grip. She turned. Judd was gone. The front yard. They heard him crash through the porch railing, heard his boots slap the mud, heard the final horse screaming as it tore into the trees with a rider barely clinging on. And just like that, he was gone. The silence returned, not peace, not yet, but quiet. Ellie lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding so hard she thought it might never settle. Colt staggered to the wall and leaned against it, chest heaving. Is it over? She asked. Colt didn't answer. She didn't blame him. They cleaned the wounds in silence. Colt's shoulder was dislocated. She said it herself with his teeth clenched around a rag and sweat dripping down both their faces. He didn't scream, not once, just let her do what needed doing. She stitched the gash on his forehead with trembling hands and a needle that barely held thread. He winced once, then nothing. "I've had worse," he said. She didn't believe him. The two men in the pantry were still unconscious. Colt checked their bindings, tightened them, then found enough rope to secure them to the old support beam in the center of the room. "What do we do with them?" Ellie asked, voice hollow. "They'll ride," Colt said, "or crawl. Once the pain sets in, they won't come back." "And Judd?" Colt's jaw clenched. "He ain't done. Even now." Colt looked at her, especially now. That night neither of them slept. They sat in chairs facing the door, Colt's rifle resting across his lap, Ellie's hands wrapped around a mug that had long since gone cold. The fire had burned low, but neither moved to stoke it. "Why did you come back?" she asked after a long silence. Colt was quiet a long time before answering. "Because I've seen what happens when no one does." He didn't elaborate. Ellie looked down at her hands, at the small scar near her knuckle from a fall years ago, at the calluses that had formed from work she never wanted to do. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She just breathed. "I don't know how to start again," she said. "Don't need to," Colt replied. "Just need to start." They sat that way until the sun began to rise, casting pale light through the broken door and across the blood-stained floor. The house looked smaller in daylight, less haunted, but the weight in her chest remained. Colt stood slow, stiff. "I can patch the door," he said. Ellie nodded. He walked outside and she followed, pausing on the porch. The land beyond stretched quiet and vast, the morning fog retreating. Birds chirped somewhere out of sight. Life hadn't stopped, even if hers had. "I've got money," Colt said suddenly, as if embarrassed by the offer. "Not much, enough for a train ticket, somewhere west, clean slate." Ellie looked at him. "And you?" He shrugged. "Depends." "On what?" "If you take it." She stared at the horizon, her ribs still sore, her ankle swollen, her soul barely stitched together. "I want to stay," she said. Colt raised an eyebrow. "Not here," she clarified, "but somewhere I choose." "You don't owe me anything," Colt said. "I know," she replied, "but I'd like you to come anyway." He nodded once, just once. Inside, the two prisoners began to stir, groaning and coughing. Colt looked at her. "You ready?" She took a deep breath, let it out. "Yes." Later that day, the sheriff rode out. Hollow Bend's law wasn't much, an old man named Mullen who hadn't drawn his sidearm in years, but he was fair. He listened, took the two men into custody, promised to wire a warning out to the next town in case Judd tried to buy protection there. It wasn't much, but it was something. Ellie watched them go, standing on the porch with Colt beside her. "You could leave now," she said. "Nobody'd stop you." "Could," he agreed. "But you won't." "No." She smiled for the first time in days. That night they made a bedroll on the floor since the upstairs still smelled like gunpowder and blood. Colt lay down with his boots off, eyes on the ceiling. Ellie curled up nearby, close enough to hear his breathing, far enough to feel like it was her choice. And for the first time in years, she slept without fear. Colt was gone again by the time she woke, but this time there was no fear in it, just knowing. She lay still for a moment beneath the quilt, eyes fixed on the beam above her, listening to the quiet that filled the cabin. Not the kind of quiet that came before violence. A different kind. A kind she barely remembered. The kind that wasn't waiting for something to break. She rose slowly, her ribs still sore, her ankle tender but holding weight. The house smelled of wood smoke and something warm, coffee. She found the pot by the hearth, half full, still steaming. There were 2 cups on the table, one clean, one not. His was still damp inside. He'd only been gone minutes. She stepped onto the porch. The sun was high already, pale and cold but unburdened by storm. The sky above Hollow Bend was clean for once. No smoke, no threat. Just the wind whispering through trees and a hawk circling high in the blue. She saw him by the tree line, crouched low, boots scuffed with dirt, hat tipped forward to keep the light from his eyes. "Scouting," she called, voice soft. Colt didn't look up right away. Then he stood and turned, nodding once. Still no sign. "No word." "Sheriff wired west," he said, crossing the yard. "If Judd's headed through, someone'll see him, but I wouldn't wait on that." She folded her arms, mostly to keep them from shaking. "Then what?" He stopped at the steps. "Then we stay ahead." She nodded, even though the thought made her legs ache. She wasn't afraid to leave, not anymore. But starting again didn't sound simple. Starting again with nothing sounded worse. And yet, the longer she stood there, the more it seemed there was nothing here left to lose. "There's a train station in Branson," Colt said, as if reading her thoughts. 2 days' ride if we cut through Roper's Hollow." "Is that safe?" "No." She met his eyes. "But it's fast." "Yes." She nodded again, slower this time. "We leave at first light." He shook his head. "We leave now." She didn't argue. She only turned and went inside, already knowing what to take. The revolver, the extra bullets, a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, 2 apples, the tin box where she'd hidden what little money she had, a handful of coins, enough for a cheap room or a hard ride. The rest she left. Furniture, dishes, memories. Let them rot. Colt saddled the horses while she wrapped her arms in linen, securing the bandages across her ribs. The pain slowed her, but not enough to stop her. When she stepped outside, she didn't look back. They rode. The land blurred past them, brown hills and empty plains, the smell of cedar thick in the air, the sun moving slow and high above them like it had nowhere better to be. Roper's Hollow wasn't marked on any map, just a place the trees grew too thick and the ground too wet. Colt had been right. It wasn't safe, but it was hidden. They camped that night in the hollow's edge, where a ring of stones circled a cold pit fire, and the stars above were sharp as glass. Colt started a fire with care. Not too high, no smoke. He moved quiet, precise. Ellie watched him from the other side of the flames, her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes darker than the night around them. "Do you ever stop running?" she asked. Colt didn't answer immediately. "You stop when it matters less who's behind you." She poked the fire with a stick, watching the embers spark and fall. "And has it, for you?" He looked up. "Sometimes." They sat in silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. She could feel the weight in her limbs, the exhaustion catching up. But her mind didn't drift like it used to. It stayed here in this moment, in the firelight and the hush. Later, when they lay in bedrolls a few feet apart, she spoke again. "What were you before this?" "A bounty hunter," he said. "I know that. I mean before that." He hesitated, then said quietly, "A brother." She turned her head, watching him in the dark. "What happened?" "I left," he stayed. "Why?" Colt sighed. "Because I thought leaving would fix something." "And did it?" "No." Ellie lay back, the stars swimming overhead. "My mother died when I was 10, she said suddenly. "My father, he wasn't strong, not like her. After she passed, it was like he disappeared, even while still breathing. I learned quick not to count on anyone. And then Judd came, and for a while he made it easy to forget." Colt said nothing. "I don't want to forget anymore," she whispered. He turned then, propping himself on one elbow. "Then don't." That night she didn't dream of fists or smoke. She dreamed of water, of wide rivers and quiet towns, and a face she didn't recognize but somehow trusted. When she woke, Colt was already packing. They rode before the sun finished rising. By midday, Branson lay ahead, Small, quiet, just a line of buildings and a leaning station house. It didn't look like salvation, but it looked like something different, and that was enough. Colt pulled the horses up just beyond the last fence. "I'll check the wire." Ellie nodded. "I'll get the tickets." They split without further words. She stepped inside the station, the musty wood and faded signs strangely comforting. A man behind the counter looked up, startled to see her. "One way?" he asked. "Yes," she said. He paused. "You know there's a delay." "How long?" "Couple hours." She hesitated. "That's fine." He printed the slips and handed them over. "Platform 2, southbound." She clutched the paper like it might disappear if she breathed too hard. When she stepped back outside, Colt was waiting, face unreadable. "They wired from Hollow Bend," he said. "Judd never showed, never doubled back. The sheriff thinks he went north. So he's gone. For now." Ellie stared out toward the trees. "What's north?" she asked. "Dead ends, long roads, men who never make it far." She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Then we're clear." "No such thing," Colt said. Still, he reached for her hand. The train came late, its whistle cutting through the quiet like an old promise. She felt the wind from its approach, smelled the soot and steam. The doors opened. A conductor stepped out. 2 passengers stepped down, no one else. Colt helped her aboard. Their bags were small, their seats near the back. She kept the revolver tucked under her coat, fingers wrapped tight around the grip, just in case. As the train pulled from the station, she looked out the window. She saw the town shrink, then vanish. She didn't cry. But when Colt rested a hand gently on her knee, she didn't pull away either. They didn't speak for miles. Just watched the land unspool, the woods give way to hills, the hills flatten into plains. A few towns passed in the distance, names she didn't recognize, faces she didn't know. For the first time in years, she didn't wonder what anyone thought of her. The train lurched around a bend. The sun had started to fall. Colt shifted beside her. "We'll stop in Darrow, small place, good fences." She nodded, "And after?" "We don't plan too far ahead," he said. "We just keep moving forward." The words settled into her like something warm. She looked out the window once more. She didn't see the man watching from the shadows at the last station. Didn't see the way his hat tilted forward, hiding his face. Didn't see the brand on his left hand, or the limp in his step. Didn't see Judd Crowley climb aboard 3 cars behind them, quiet, patient, bleeding but breathing. Didn't hear the conductor take his ticket. Didn't notice the way he chose a seat where he could see the back of the cabin. Didn't notice that the game wasn't over. Not yet. The rhythm of the train lulled Ellie into a kind of uneasy calm. She watched the land change again, its edges softening, the trees growing taller and thicker, the air beginning to smell faintly of pine. The sun was low now, burning a deeper orange than she remembered, casting long streaks of light through the windows. Colt sat beside her, one arm resting across the back of the bench, his coat collar turned up against the cold sneaking in through the cracks in the windows. He hadn't said much in the past hour, but he hadn't needed to. His silence wasn't the kind that frightened her anymore. It was steady, watchful, always scanning the aisles, noting faces, every movement, every cough or step that sounded a little too out of rhythm with the rest of the passengers. She thought of asking if he was nervous, if he thought Judd might have followed, but the question stuck in her throat. They'd come so far, crossed woods and cold and nearly death itself. The idea that it might still not be over, it just didn't feel fair. So instead, she leaned her head against the window, let the cold glass rest against her cheek, and told herself they were safe. The train slowed around a bend and the whistle blew 2 short blasts. Colt sat up straighter. Ellie opened her eyes. "What is it?" "Not scheduled to stop here," he murmured. They both turned to the window. There was no station, just a small platform and a short shed beside it, barely enough to shelter a handful of travelers. One man stood waiting, broad shoulders, wide-brimmed hat. He didn't board when the train slowed, just tipped his head slightly like he was listening for something. The train didn't fully stop, just slowed enough to let off one passenger from a forward car. Colt rose quietly. "Stay here." "Colt." He shook his head. "Just watch the bags." He disappeared down the aisle, boots soft against the worn floorboards. Ellie sat frozen. She gripped the revolver hidden beneath her coat, her fingers already going numb. Her eyes stayed fixed on the car door Colt disappeared through, willing him to come back. He was gone longer than she liked. A minute passed, then two. She rose slowly. The train jolted and began to pick up speed again, the platform vanishing behind them. Still no Colt. She stepped into the aisle. The other passengers barely noticed, two older women knitting near the back, a man snoring quietly 2 rows up, a conductor moving lazily through the cars. Ellie made her way toward the front, heart hammering harder now with every step. She passed one car, then another. Still no Colt. Then she saw the door. Open. The connecting platform between the two forward cars swung slightly with the train's motion. Colt stood there, barely, one hand clinging to the rail, the other gripping the collar of a man halfway over the side. Judd. The realization struck her like cold water. Colt's body blocked most of the view, but she could see Judd's face. Blood streaked down his temple, eyes wild, mouth twisted in something like hate or laughter or both. Colt was struggling, trying to shove him fully off, but Judd had a hand wrapped around Colt's belt, using his weight like an anchor. "Let go," Colt barked. Judd laughed. "You first." Ellie didn't think. She ran. The conductor called out behind her, alarmed, but she didn't hear him. She reached the open door, grabbed the handle to steady herself as the wind whipped her coat back. Judd saw her then. "Ellie," he snarled, spitting blood, "look at what he's made you." She looked at Colt. His eyes met hers, calm, certain, but his face had gone pale and she could see the muscles in his arm starting to shake. "He won't fall," Colt shouted. "He'll pull me with him." Ellie raised the revolver. Her hands shook so badly she could barely aim. "Ellie," Colt began. She didn't wait. She aimed low just above Judd's wrist. The shot cracked through the air like a whip. Judd screamed and his grip loosened just enough. Colt wrenched free, shoving hard. Judd's body slipped, tumbled off the train, disappearing into the trees below. Colt staggered backward into the car. Ellie dropped the revolver and caught him under the arms, dragging him fully inside. They collapsed onto the floor together, breathless, shaking. For a long moment neither of them spoke, just breathed. Then Colt winced, rolling to sit up. His shoulder had opened again, blood soaking through his shirt, but he waved her off. "You all right?" he asked. "I should ask you that," she replied, pressing a hand against his chest to keep him steady. He coughed a laugh. "I've had worse." But she didn't smile. The conductor arrived moments later, face red, breath short. "What the hell happened?" "Man jumped the train," Colt said without missing a beat. "Didn't expect the landing." The conductor stared. "That the truth?" Ellie met his eyes. "Yes." The man looked between them, uncertain, then back toward the open door. "I'll wire the next town," he said. "See if he shows up." Colt nodded, then leaned back against the wall. They rode the rest of the way in silence, the world outside darkening by the minute. Ellie sat close, one hand over Colt's, her other gripping the window rail. Every bump of the train jolted pain through her ribs, but she didn't care. Not anymore. At the next town, they disembarked. Colt's wounds needed tending again. Ellie found a woman who ran a small boarding house, who didn't ask too many questions, who gave them a room near the back and a bottle of something sharp to clean the cuts. Colt didn't speak while she stitched him again. He just lay on his side, eyes fixed on the window, the distant sounds of horses and wagons passing below. She finished, cleaned the blood from her fingers, and sat beside him. "I thought he'd never stop," she said. Colt didn't answer. "But now I think maybe he did." Still nothing. She reached for his hand, didn't he? Colt turned slowly. "He'll stop if he's dead." Her throat tightened. "You don't think that, Fall?" "Maybe," Colt said, "but men like him, they don't die easy." She looked down at their hands. "Then what do we do?" He didn't let go. "We prepare, we live, we don't run anymore." She nodded. That night they lay in the narrow bed side by side, not touching at first. But eventually his fingers found hers beneath the blanket, and she curled toward him, breath steady, heart calm. They stayed in Darrow 2 more days. Colt's shoulder healed slowly. Ellie helped in the kitchen to pay for the room. They spoke to no one about what had happened, didn't mention Judd, didn't speak his name. But every night Colt cleaned his revolver. Every night Ellie checked the locks. They didn't say they were afraid. They just acted like people who'd learned to survive. On the 3rd day, they went to the post office. Colt picked up a letter. His eyes scanned it slowly, then he handed it to Ellie. A friend of his, an old partner from Bounty days, was working land further west. Said there was room if they wanted it. Said there were cabins to mend, fences to build, and a sheriff that didn't mind where you came from so long as you pulled your weight. Ellie looked up. "Is it real?" Colt shrugged. "Better than here." She looked around Darrow, the dusty streets, the wary eyes, the quiet. It wasn't a bad place, but it wasn't a future. "When do we go?" "Now." She smiled, small and quiet. They packed in silence. Colt saddled 2 horses he'd bartered for with a silver watch and a promise. Ellie brought only what fit in a single bag, the revolver, a folded dress, the locket she hadn't looked at in years. As they rode out, the town faded behind them like mist. Ahead lay something new. Maybe not perfect, but real. They were 2 figures on the horizon now, him with the sun on his back, her with a scar that no longer felt like shame. And miles behind them, deep in the trees past broken rails and snow-covered trails, a man crawled from the riverbank, soaked, limping, blood in his mouth and hate in his heart. Judd Crowley wasn't dead. Not yet. But he'd changed. And he was coming. The land grew wilder the farther west they went. Trees thickened into forests, paths vanished into brush, and the sky opened wider than Ellie had ever seen. Some days it rained. Some days the wind screamed loud enough to make the horses shudder. But the nights were quiet in a way that made her feel something she hadn't in years, like maybe she wasn't being chased, like maybe she wasn't just surviving anymore. Colt never said much about what came next. He just rode. When he spoke, it was about the terrain, the weather, the shape of the river they were following. Never about the man who had clawed his way back from the fall. But Ellie knew. She saw it in the way he scanned every ridge, paused at every bend, checked their tracks even when the trail was too soft to hold a print. Judd had been silenced lately, but silence didn't mean surrender. They arrived in Temple Hollow late on the 5th evening since leaving Darrow. It wasn't much more than a cluster of cabins scattered near the pine edge, with a blacksmith's forge, a small store, and a church that looked half swallowed by ivy. But there was light in the windows and smoke in the chimneys, and that alone felt like safety. Colt rode up to a wide fence where a man waited, arms folded over the top rail, gray in his beard and a badge on his chest. The sheriff. "Hail," the man asked. Colt nodded. "Long time." "Too long." He turned his eyes toward Ellie, appraising but not unkind. "She yours?" "No," Colt said simply, "but she's with me." The man gave a grunt that might have meant welcome, then opened the gate. They were shown to a cabin on the edge of the trees, bare floorboards, a cot, a stove, and not much more. But it was dry, warm, and no one raised a hand or a voice. Ellie unpacked their few things in silence. Colt fed the horses. They didn't speak until after dark. She sat by the fire, arms wrapped around her knees. He sat across from her, rolling a bullet between his fingers. "I know he's still out there," she said quietly. Colt didn't deny it. "He'll come." "I know." She watched the flame flicker. "So what do we do?" "We wait," he said, "and we don't run this time." That night she didn't sleep much, but she didn't feel hunted either. She lay beside Colt on the narrow cot, his breath steady against her neck, and tried to believe what he'd said, that they didn't have to run. That maybe the worst had already passed. For days, life settled into something almost normal. Ellie helped in the bakery down the lane, kneading dough and pouring coffee for the townsfolk, many of whom had never heard of Judd Crowley and wouldn't care if they had. Colt worked with the blacksmith, hammering rails and repairing bridles, his hands always moving, always building. The sheriff checked in once, asking quiet questions, never pushing. Ellie told him the truth, or most of it. Colt told him less, but it was enough. Then came the letter. Left in the mailbox one morning, no stamp, no signature, just a folded scrap of paper. "I see you. Tell her to keep baking. She'll need the warmth." Colt found it first. He didn't show her until after dinner, when the dishes were washed and the fire had burned low. Her face went pale. "How?" "He's smart," Colt said, "and he's patient. We should leave." "No. But if he's close." "He's always been close. Doesn't change what we do." "But what if?" Colt took her hand. "We stay, we fight if we have to." The next morning they went to the sheriff. He read the note, jaw tightening. "We'll watch the roads," he said. "Double patrol. But he won't come through the gate, not his kind. He'll wait. He'll bleed us from the edges." And that's exactly what Judd did. Over the next few days the signs came subtle. A dog poisoned on the edge of town. A fence post chopped clean through. A woman's laundry stolen and burned in the woods. Small things. Things that might have been nothing if you didn't know better. But they knew. Every night, Colt sat on the porch cleaning his rifle. Every night Ellie locked the doors twice, bolted the windows, kept her boots near the bed. They didn't speak about what they feared. Fear had no place between them anymore, just preparation. Then on the sixth night he came. Not at the edge, not in shadows. Right down the middle of the road. It was near midnight. Rain had started to fall, thin and cold. The streets were empty. The tavern had closed. Lamps were low. Colt saw him first, hat low, coat soaked, walking like a man who didn't care if he was recognized. He stepped into the middle of the street and stopped. Colt opened the door. "Ellie." She was already rising. She'd known this was coming. She moved to his side like she'd done 100 times before. Judd raised his hand slowly, not with a gun, but with something else. A ribbon. It was hers, torn from the blouse she'd left behind in Bitter Creek. "I came for her," he said. The sheriff stepped out then, rifle in hand. More men appeared on porches, eyes watching, hands near weapons, but no one fired. "She's under my protection," the sheriff said. Judd smiled. "That means something. It means this town doesn't abide cowards." "I ain't here to burn it," Judd said. "I'm here for what's mine." Ellie stepped forward. "I was never yours." His smile faded. "I gave you everything." "You took everything." Silence. Then Judd's eyes shifted to Colt. "You," he said, "you took her." Colt didn't flinch. "She left, I just kept her alive." Judd spat in the dirt. "You going to kill me now, that it?" "No," Colt said, "not unless you force it." Judd took one step forward. 3 guns cocked. He stopped. Rain fell harder. Then slowly he raised both hands. "I'm not here to die," he said. "You came to the wrong place then," the sheriff replied. Judd looked at Ellie. "I'll be back," he said. "You know I will." She didn't answer. He turned and walked. No one stopped him. No one followed. The rain swallowed his figure, then he was gone. The sheriff exhaled. "Won't be the last we see of him." "I know," Colt said. But he didn't look afraid. That night they didn't sleep. The next morning Ellie rose before dawn. She baked bread. She braided her hair. She loaded her revolver. Colt sharpened his knife. They knew he'd be back. But they didn't wait inside anymore. They stepped out into the light, into the day, into the life they'd made from ash and fire and grit. If Judd Crowley came again, he'd find something different. He'd find a woman who wasn't his. A man who wasn't running. And a town that stood between them like stone. The fire was still burning. But this time it wouldn't consume them. This time they would ride through it. Together,